Turn my mic on.
Can you guys hear me? Hello? Yeah. Is that good? Mm-hmm. All right. Welcome to our Haftorah portion, which is still Vayera. We're in the 4th Torah portion. We are following our Torah portions, which is what the Jewish people do every year. They'll read a couple scriptures out of the first 5 books of the Bible and cycle through until they get to October 26th, around that time. And then they start all over again so that they complete the first 5 books of the Bible every year. Now, what the Haftorah is a little piece of the Torah portion. Because as we know, the Jewish people were under different rules of government, so they were not allowed to continue in their study, and they were not allowed to practice the Torah portion and read it in their synagogues every Saturday. So what they did to trick the government was to get some scriptures from different parts of the Bible and that will reiterate the main topic of the Torah portion, so that they would, be secretly able to study their word and be able to keep their connection to God. All right. Now, this Torah portion for Vayera means he appeared. And they're talking about when God appeared to Abraham. Our Torah portion is going to cover the Haftorah, which is also God appearing. We're going to see some secrets of them connecting the dots to the original Torah portion. But our Haftorah is coming out of 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 to verse 37. And then if you like to also incorporate the New Testament into your teaching, they have added Luke chapter 17, verse 28 to 37. So I'm just going to briefly go over what we're going to see in this portion, this Haftorah, this tiny piece of the truth. We're going to be talking about a widow and a barren woman, right? And you're like, how does this relate to Abraham? Now, one of the things that the Jewish people believe, right? You know how the Christian people say, so it is in the natural, so it is in the spirit, so it is in the natural. The Jewish people do the reverse thought process of that. Theirs is, as it in the natural, God will show himself supernaturally into our physical realm. So it's a kind of a reverse or a flip-flop of things, right? Now, in this Torah portion, in this Haftorah, we're going to talk about the widow and the oil. Remember I said the oil's got to be flowing. We're going to talk about the Shunammite woman, right? Who was barren. So we can kind of see a little bit of the connection on why they would incorporate this Torah portion. But it's going to be a big event of taking a supernatural God and coming down to our physical world to do this thing and show his power through his strength. So that's one of the connections, right? And we're going to see that this Shunammite woman, in addition to being the example of God doing this great thing for her, we're going to see an example of the Jewish people and how their culture is surrounded about hospitality. Like anytime you get a call and you're a Jewish family, someone's coming into town, they are going to figure out who's coming with you so that they can have enough to provide during your stay. They're going to make you a home. They're going to, make sure you're comfortable. They're going to feed you and your family. And that's just their culture. And that's what we saw, when we were making those comparisons between Abraham and Lot. We recognize that Abraham was hospitable and Lot was not, right? So, hospitable, right? And he was not. But that's just one of their cultures. So let's open up and let's talk about, because you guys know I like to ask you questions. Why do they start this Torah portion with the widow woman? Does anyone know why she's significant? And I'm turning over to 2 Kings chapter 4 while I'm asking you guys that question. Who is this widow woman? That's the question, right? How does she relate? Anyone?
Some lady in debt.
Right, she was in debt. What else do y'all know about her?
She had 2 sons.
Right, she had 2 sons. What else?
And she expected the... Oh.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Oh, she was expecting the priesthood to take care of her situation.
Yeah, but where did she get the right to ask that? It's something that I asked God, right? So let's read a little bit. It says, 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets to Elisha, saying, your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take to him my 2 sons to be bondmen. They're going to make my sons slaves. And Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me what you have in the house. And she said, your handmaid has not anything in the house save a pot of oil. So in this portion, we're also going to think about the things that we say and how it affects our life, our world. Like, are we saying positive things? Are we saying negative things? Now, the widow woman, she only had oil. That's what she said. She's now a widow, and she only has oil. But she said, my husband. Has anyone ever wondered who her husband was? In your reading of the Bible? No. No?
I didn't realize she was one of the prophets' wives.
Right, she's one of the prophets' wives. And in this time, we're in a climate of persecution of the prophets. Now, the Jewish people have these stories that they use to interconnect everything that's going on in the background. And in their midrash, or their targum, which is, their writings, additional writings that connect to the Bible, she is Obadiah's wife. Do you guys remember Obadiah? How did she get into debt? Right? I'll tell you. Obadiah is found he has his own book, and he's talking about this situation that's occurring during his time, right? And in where we at? Where we find this at? 1 Kings chapter 18 and 3. We got Ahab. Y'all remember Ahab? Mm-hmm. We got Jezebel. Y'all remember Jezebel? And we have Obadiah. Now, Ahab was the king that completely turned his back on God. Right. And he married a woman that worshiped Baal. So they get together, they turn their back on God, and they create this statue, and they begin to worship it. And in addition to turning their back on God and his people, they persecute the prophets of God, right? So Obadiah the hero comes in, and he says, well, let's get together, let's gather all these prophets and hide in a cave, and we'll provide for them. That's how they got into debt. And then he ends up dying during that time. So he's dead and she's broke. So what is she going to do? She goes to Elisha and she says, my husband is dead. He's been doing this good work in the priesthood. I don't have anything left. They're about to steal my 2 sons. I'm in a patriarchal society, which means that if my sons are gone, I'm done. I have no land, I have no property, I have no title. So this is how we're going to see it connects to the Torah portion, because God always provides. He always has provision for widows, orphans, and children, right? And strangers, widows, orphans, and the strangers. So, now, we're moving down. She says, well, what do you have? And she says, all I have is oil. So, God, when he's coming to these physical people, which we are, right? He's going to use whatever we have, right? To do this supernatural work. So what did Sarah have? she didn't have a cycle. She didn't have that time of woman. So that's how this supernatural event was going to take place. God had to intervene.
Right.
So it is with this widow woman in the oil. She had oil, right? She just had to go out and get some vessels from the neighbors, and he specifically told her to shut the door, right? But the most interesting thing I saw in this portion was what she said out of her mouth affected what happened behind those closed doors, right? So they go tell the two sons, go get the oil. And they go and they gather the oil. Well, they go and gather the vessels of oil, right? And they get as many as they can find. And then they start to gather the oil. And it just keeps flowing until they run out of vessels. So she says out of her mouth, pass me a vessel. Because the oil is still flowing at that time. Right? So where's that at? We move on down. Yeah. And it came to pass in 6. When the vessels were full, that she said to her son, bring me yet a vessel. And he said to her, there is not a vessel more. And the oil stayed. So that's when the oil stopped flowing. We also see a parallel at the beginning of 2 Kings chapter 1 through 3, where they were in the time of war with the kings of Edom and Israel and the Moabites. They were going up against the Moabites, right? And they went to the prophets and they were like, we need to fight and win this battle against Moab. And they said, go dig these wells, right? Go dig these wells. And they dug as much as their faith had. So the point I'm trying to wrap it around to is how far your faith is, how far you're able to believe and able to see. That's how far God's supernatural power will work. It just works on how much you believe. So that's why the oil stopped. That's all they believed in. Because I figured if I was getting all this oils just flowing everywhere, in the process of time, I would be like, okay, we need to start selling this. Because it's not talking about within this one short period of time, the oil was flowing from night to dark. It kept flowing until they were like, well, we don't have any more space. We can't take any more, right? So I believe that they stopped the flow of God's oil because, like we always know, they should have been Crisco. They should have been known as Crisco or the people that do Mazola or palm oil, all these people. We should know their names. Anyway, that was the widow and the oil. That's her story in our Torah portion.
Is that our Obadiah oil?
Right, it should be Obadiah's oil. Exactly. Right. So, okay, so we see that, but we kind of discovered what was going on there. And with that oil, they were able to pay off the debt, and God was able to provide, which he says he will always do, is provide for his people. He always will provide. Okay? Now, this Shunammite woman, because remember, in this Haftorah, we're making connections to the Torah portion, right? We're trying to see, how does this fit? You know, God was providing for his people, right? We know this is where he appeared to Abraham. He's coming down because he's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Our gospel is talking about, our New Testament scriptures is talking about in the days of Lot. They continue to act as if there was no God, that God, you know, his principles weren't important to follow. So that's what that gospel is referencing. We see a promise of a son to Sarah, right? And we see that after this long period of time, God comes back and says, sacrifice your son. Why do you think he was saying sacrifice your son? Anybody have any thoughts?
There was a test.
There was a test. What else?
We have to be willing to give all to God.
Exactly. We do have to be willing to give all.
Sarah.
A son, right? What else do you guys see while I'm making little notes? Anyone?
Like with the parallels?
We're just talking about the proportion. Like, what the question was, why do you think God gave them something, gave them a son, and then said sacrifice the son? We got to think about more than just what we're seeing on the page. We got to think about the time that we're in, right? They're taking a Gentile. Abraham was the first Gentile who was, brought into this faith of worshiping one God, coming out of paganism. He's moving from polytheism to monotheism. And what do we remember that those pagans did? Sacrifice their children.
Their gods to do something.
Exactly, right? But why do you think God would ask him to do something the pagans did, knowing that God is making a distinction of who he is and why we should serve him?
So that he didn't make Isaac into a god.
That's a thought. Anyone else?
See how strong his faith was?
To see how strong his faith was.
To distinguish, to see if he would obey God's voice, but also to make sure that, I don't know, maybe he would have killed Isaac and sacrificed him to God.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe, because there was no stopping him until Gabriel called out from heaven, right?
Right.
Now, could we also say that, okay, let's take an example, right? We can just move out of the book and talk about a natural thing or a present day situation where God promises you a house, right? And you're like waiting on this promise. And you're waiting on this promise for years, right? And then it finally manifests. But then you get to the point where you're in this place, you're constantly working, you're not thinking about the person that gave you this item, right? And you lose yourself in it, right? And you lose it, right? But if you had realized that God is the source, this is what he was demonstrating to Abraham and Sarah, that even though he gave it to them, that child was still not theirs, right? Even though he birthed it through them, because God is showing himself as the God of heaven and earth, which means he owns everything, the child, the house, the money, the job, whatever. But people get into a place of losing themselves, right? He says, seek me first, losing themselves in the things that God has blessed us with, that they forget to honor the person or the being that gave us what he wanted. So he was making a big demonstration that it didn't belong to him in the first place. Now, we do read in the book of Job that Job said God gives and takes away, but God does not take things away. We lose things when we forget our focus. God always said, you honor me first, right? In all these things, you honor God. But the demonstration, he was showing himself that he's not a pagan. He does not want you to sacrifice your children. He does not want you to see your children as like this possession that you can take possession over. We're supposed to be the guardians of our children. We're supposed to like cultivate them in the way that they should go. And we remember in Genesis chapter 18 of our portion that God said, I know Abraham. I know he's going to teach him my ways. I know he's going to train him in the way that he should go. And he's going to follow after me. So this is just God showing that I own everything, including humanity, and I don't want people to go around killing their children, right? Now, let's talk about the Shunammite woman. What do we remember about this Shunammite woman?
She didn't even want a kid.
Right.
But
she didn't want to give honor to the man of God.
Well, she didn't want to be tricked. She didn't want.
She did want to give honor to the man of God. She built that apartment for him.
Yeah.
I said she did want to give honor.
But what she didn't want was to be tricked, if you will, because
Right. So during this time, right? You said y'all just telling me things. She didn't want to. She was hospitable because what we're doing. Remember, with the Haftorah, we're making connections to the greater Torah portion. So the Shunammite, compared to Abraham, was hospitable, right? She was wealthy because we start her story at 8. Yeah. So she's from the land of Shunem, right? We're at 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8. She is hospitable.
Right.
She did convince her husband, which I'm like, what? She got a great husband to be like, let some stranger in my house. But it's their culture, right? To be hospitable.
Right.
Someone's on the way, traveling by, and you see they need a place to stay. They're going to open their house to you, right? So she was hospitable. She had everything that she needed, right? Which is why it's so interesting based on what we just discussed, right? On how we have God saying, let me have what I gave, right? She was a Shunammite woman. She had everything. And she said to her husband, let's go ahead and make him a place in our house where he can have a place to rest, he can have a place to eat, and he can have a place to think on his own, right? Because they gave him a stool or something, right? So he could sit down and be quiet in his thoughts, right? Just so he can hear the voice of God. So that's what's going on. But what is the backstory? Y'all, we always have to read our Bible in context, because we can't just jump into the book and think it has no reference, right? So who is Elisha? And I'm calling him Elisha because it helps me to remember who his mentor was. I used to always get them confused, right? So who was his mentor? Elijah. And now, do you guys remember what happened with Elijah in the beginning of 2 Kings 1 through 3? Do y'all remember what happened? I will tell you. This is not a pop quiz.
When he was being followed around by the other guy that was mimicking him.
Elisha?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll fill you guys in, okay? So Elijah was the prophet of God.
Right.
And he was the one during this time of Jezebel and Ahab, right? He was the one that they were like, oh, help us. And he's like, yeah, I don't even worship God. Why would I help you fight this war with the Moabites? So, but he helped them anyway. And then his, what do you call it? His subordinate or his mentor, was Elisha. And Elisha was just in the field minding his own business. And then Elijah just showed up, right? Swinging his mantle. Right. And he drops the mantle and he's giving it to Elisha. And he says, you're going to take my place, right? And I'm just trying to briefly go over the first 3 chapters. You're going to take my place, but Elisha says to him, I want a double portion. Now, we do remember that Elijah got a message from God to go visit a widow woman as well. But instead of Elisha's story of this woman seeing him and saying, let's go give this man this home, Elijah had to beg the widow woman to get into the house. Because she was like, I only have my son, and we got like 1 cup of flour. I can't feed you. But he had to keep going and saying, I have to get in this house. Because God told him to get in the house. Because God knew something was about to happen to her son. Right? Son ends up dying. Elijah prays over the son to wake him up. Right. Now think about this. What happened with Elijah and what's going to happen with Elisha. He asked him after he dropped his mantle, he said, give me a double portion. So he's got to reflect what happened in his mentor's life. You have to see something reflecting in his life, right? Okay. Supernatural things being shown in the natural physical world. So we're back to Elisha and with the Shunammite woman. Now he goes and he's with his servant Gehazi, right? Is that how y'all say it? Gehazi, right? Who's walking with the man of God. And we don't really think Gehazi has too much faith because he couldn't raise that kid from the dead. Did y'all read that portion? Okay. So the Shunammite woman invites them into their home after the husband blessed them. The Shunammite has everything she needs. She's a woman of substance is what it said. So he was like, wow, she's really bestowing all this great thing on me. I wonder why this is. You asked for a double portion. That's why. Anyway, asked for a double portion and he's got this. He's got a home. He's got provision. He's technically like a stranger moving through the earth. And God always provides for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. So he's got that going on, and he's talking to this woman, and she's like, well, I don't need anything. I have everything that I need, right? And he just makes this promise out of the blue. Well, God's going to bless you with a son. And she's like, don't be making promises you can't keep. But what did God do? He turned it around, just like he did with Sarah, and he put a baby in her womb. Now, she was also with an old husband, and she was also like, I don't really know how this is going to happen. My husband is old, you know, and she was probably past the time of woman as well. But it happened. And she grew him up, and she raised her child into a great boy. I mean, he's not a baby. We always look at these stories and we're thinking when they say child or lad, they're not infants, okay? This man was in the field and he got a headache. Some people say it was heat stroke, right? But the point is, he ran home, fell asleep on his mom's knees, and he died. So then the woman she does something unique. And I think the parallel to me is what I saw is when she had the situation, she responded differently than the woman with the oil. So we're thinking about, you know, our Torah portion, Vayera, he appeared. But we're looking at how when God appears, what example are we setting? What example does God want us to set? We parallel Abraham and Lot, right? Lot was not hospitable. Lot was not able to convince the people. The destroyer of worlds was coming and they needed to get out of the place. But Abraham was. Now, so it is with the woman in the oil and the Shunammite woman. God provided for her, but she somehow still stifled God's power in her situation, right? Her faith was not as strong as the Shunammite woman. Neither was Lot's faith as strong as Abraham, his uncle / father. Okay, so both of them shut the door. Both of them came out with different results, right? They both take each time they close the door. Now, this is what happened with do y'all remember what happened when the Shunammite woman, after her son collapsed and she put him in the room? What did she do? She closed the door. She went to the prophet. And what did she say?
She said,
all is well. Versus, all I have is oil. All I have is this thing. And now I don't have any more vessels, right? You could have sent your son out to go buy vessels. You have oil flowing in your home, you know. By then, you should have got creative. But she says all is well. So I think, you know, we need to walk away with this Torah portion of where are you in your faith, right? That's how we talked about our Torah portion on Thursday night. We said, where are you? When they were asking Sarah, when the the two angels and God came down to meet with Abraham, they asked Abraham, where's your wife? And we know that they were also referencing Genesis chapter 3, where Adam and Eve had sinned. And they were saying God comes down in the cool of the day, and he asked the people, where are you? Right? He was looking for them spiritually. He was trying to see where their faith was at that time, right? With the promises that he has sent out, you know, whether it was through an angel or through his word of mouth, where are you in this place of faith, right? So, wouldn't this be a good story to tell our children if we were not able to walk in our Haftorah teaching on Saturday, if we were under some terrible rule, right? Because that's what the Haftorah is. It's like, how can we make connections to our Torah portion, right? Where's your faith? Right. Do you think that God is going to take away something that he promised you, Sarah, or Shunammite woman, whose name I don't know? Well, anyway, because she responded differently in faith, she ran to Elisha. She tried to grab his feet. And we know that he's a prophet. We know that he's keeping the Torah. We know that they separate themselves from women because they don't know what's going on in your life. They don't know what time of month it is, right? They try to make that distinction. But he swatted Gehazi away, and he's like, let her be. Something's wrong. And God has not revealed this to me, right? So this was a test for the Shunammite and Elisha. So he tells his servant, go out and take my staff and lay it on the boy's head, right? And she still had not uttered what had happened, right? And so but he told Gehazi what? What did he tell him? On the way down to the boy. What did he tell him?
Don't talk to nobody.
Right. Do y'all think he did it?
Gehazi?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
In the Jewish midrash, right? In their stories, they think he was stopping, just like the little boys were stopping when they were like going, what you need this vessel for? You know, mommy needs it because she's doing this thing, right? The secret had gotten out somehow. Then he was on his way to raise the dead, and he was like, I'm really on a lost cause. This boy is dead. Which is why when he laid the cane down, he couldn't get him to raise up, right? Because he wasn't walking in the same faith as his mentor. Okay? So,
That's a message.
yeah. So then, they hadn't heard that the boy got up from the bed, so then Elisha had to go and see what happened. You know, he had to go in there and pray and, you know, start working on his power and calling on God, talking about, didn't you say you were going to give me a double portion, right? You got to get this kid up. But he never said he was dead either. He just breathed on him, right? And he was able to raise him up. So, how are we making the connections, right? If we're talking to our children about the Torah portion, the things that matter, God promised something. God delivered on the promise.
Yes, he did.
God put a test on what would you do if I asked you to give it back, right? In Sarah's case, they were going to try to sacrifice her son, and the Shunammite, they took his life away. But because she still believed in the promise, she was able to hold on, and they were able to raise him back. And now we have the generations that came out of Abraham and Sarah, right? And here we are, learning about the Torah portion and these principles. All right. So, I think we should walk away with knowing how God comes to us at this point in life, right? Because we're trying to get some supernatural miracles going in our life, but we can't think that it's just going to fall out of the sky.
Right.
Because God is going to use his power with whatever talent we have, right? That's what we need to think about. I can have a baby, right? I may be 70 years old, but God can work, because you still have a little round part between your neck and your bottom, right? The baby can live in there. I don't know how. But God can do a supernatural thing with what you have, right? All right. So, got a little history for you guys. Does anyone have any comments? I'm trying to look to see if I covered everything. How are we relating this portion to our Torah portion? Anybody? Comments? Questions? Okay, that's it for me then. All right, you guys be blessed.
Amen.
Thanks for watching.